Okay, so for lesson 12, we're going to be talking about working with raw files. Now, this is something that you may not be doing on a regular basis, or you may not have a need for, but they do have a filter now in Photoshop that allows you to edit in this way as well on regular files. So I'm going to kind of go through and explain to you what a raw file is and kind of how the different systems work with whenever you're working with the raw file. So we're going to start off by opening the file that I gave you. Now, with a raw file, when you open it in Photoshop, it's going to give you a little bit different of a window. So you're going to see something that looks more like this. Okay, so what it does is whenever you're shooting with a camera, you can change your settings so that you're shooting in a raw file. With a raw file, depending on what type of camera you have, I have a Nikon, so you can see at the end of my lesson 12, it says NEF. That's the Nikon abbreviation. Canon has a different one, Sony has a different one. So whenever you're working with a raw file, what it's doing is it's saving all of that information. It's going to make a much larger file. It's also going to be the purest file that you can have because it's saying that nothing's been edited or nothing's been touched on it, okay? So it comes in really handy whenever you're shooting like this because they're much bigger files. So let's say you wanted to go to the beach and take a photograph of a beautiful sunset and you want to blow it up really large and like hang it over your living room couch or over your bed, but you wanted it to be really large. Shooting it in RAW is going to give you a bigger file. So then you'll have to save it as a JPEG at that bigger file size, and then you can print it at a larger size. Whereas if you are sometimes working in JPEG or some other types of file types, you can't print them quite as large. So this gives you all that information and it saves it in there. Now, after we save it, it will save an attachment into the file. So if you actually look at your files, let's see if I have mine up. Yeah. So if you look at your files in your folder, you're going to see something that looks like this XMP. This is just all the information that you're putting into that file. So it like saves it to the side. Okay. So you can always go in and reset back to the original format. Now, what this does is it gives you a little bit better of a breakdown than if you're just working in Photoshop and making all these adjustments individually. It's going to have a lot of these in here together. So the first one you're going to look at right here is basic. Now, this is a photo of my son for his senior graduation pictures. We took him down to the graffiti wall and I took a bunch of pictures of him in front of this graffiti wall. And I really want that color to pop and just to really stand out. You're going to notice that the picture overall feels a little blue, not only because of the wall, it's just a cooler picture. So you can adjust here if you wanted to change your temperature of your photo. And I'm going to take mine. I'm just going to leave it right about where it was, which was around 6,600. Okay. You can also adjust your tint. So tint is just what it's going to give you to pull out some of those other colors so that it's not quite as yellow or quite as blue. You can also come up here to the white balance spot and make any adjustments to it. So you can change it to auto where it's going to automatically read it for you, which to me is a little high on the yellow. You can do daylight. You can change it to cloudy, which it actually was that day. So that's pretty close on to what it should look like. You can do shade, tungsten, fluorescent, and it's going to change it based on those lighting types. Now, the next one's down, I'll just kind of go through quickly. Exposure. So if you took the picture and it's a little too dark or a little too bright, you can change your exposure right there. Contrast, so you can add that difference between the black and white areas. So if you want it to feel a little bit more flat or a little bit more contrasty, that's in there. Whoops, come on. We have highlights. So this is really nice. Up in the top left, you can see it's a little bit brighter. If you wanted to pull out some of that highlight, you can pull this down and it's going to pull out that highlight. Or you can push it up and it's going to push up those highlighted areas, so those brighter areas. Same thing with shadows. You can see he kind of has a strong shadow on the side of his face and on the right side of his body. So by pulling the shadow up, you can get rid of some of that, or you can put more shadows in by pushing it down. Whites, only adjust on the whites, and blacks, make adjustments to your blacks. Now, whenever I edit my own personal photos, I push my contrast up a little bit. I like to have a little bit more contrast in mine. And I sometimes push that black down just a smidge, just to give it a little bit more of that pop. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give myself some contrast here. I want you to play with these though and get the image to look the way you want it to. So I'm going to pull a little bit of that highlight out. I'm going to push a little bit of the shadow. And again, like I said, I want my blacks to be really crisp. So I'm going to take that down. Now down here, you can also mess with your textures, your clarity, and your dehaze. Clarity is the one that I normally, if I do any of these, this would be the one that I would use. What clarity does is going to, if you have some out of focus, it'll help focus it in a little bit. Now, what I always tell my photo students though, is if you take a bad photo and it's blurry, there is no way to 100% get rid of that blur without making it look photoshopped or edit it in some way. This one does help though if you have it just slightly out of focus and you're wanting to throw a little bit of that focus back in there, okay? So that's right there with clarity. Vibrance. I used to use saturation a lot. I've started actually using vibrance. For me, especially with people, it makes it look a little bit more natural. So you can see like his face turned really orangey when I pushed the saturation, but it didn't have that same effect when I used vibrance. So it really depends on what you're kind of looking for, but it's really making those blues pop from the original image. So here is the original. And if I push that vibrance up, you can really see those teals pick up, okay? So those are a couple things you can play with. Now, that's just the main basic ones. You can take this down even further and we can drop this right here and go down to curves. Curves is going to allow you to make adjustments to your highlights, your lights, your darks, your shadows based on the curve, based on this graph. We have detail. So this is where you're going to do sharpening. This again, well, if you sharpen, it will help a little bit with clarity. Noise reduction. Sometimes you'll have a lot of pixelation in an image and you want to get rid of the noise. And then color noise reduction. If it's really spotty and grainy and you can see a lot of little color spots, this is a good place to go. You have color mixing. So in here, this is really great because maybe I really want my blues to be more purple. So I can come down here as long as this little section right here says hue, and I can change all my blues to have more of a purple color to them. So that's a nice fast way of doing it. Now, you can also change based on saturation. So saturation's right here. So maybe I don't want any yellow in my image, and I can come up here to the yellow and I can pull that yellow slider over and you can see all my little yellow highlights that were behind them are now gone. Or I always think of like back in the 1980s, you've probably seen like family members that have the photos, like everything's in black and white except for the red roses. You can also do something along those lines in here. So, you know, I can always go through here and knock down everything except for my son's school colors were purple and gold. So I will knock down everything except for purple and yellow. Oops, I need to keep my blues up there. There we go. So now I just have purple and yellow. Okay, so you can do something like that and play with the saturation. And you also have luminous in here, so you can push the brightness and darkness of some of those colors, okay? I'm going to come down to color grading. This is another way of being able to change some of those colors and be able to adjust your midtones, your shadows, and your highlights independently. You have optics. This is where you can play with the way the actual camera took the shot, or, you know, the using corrections. You have geometry. You have effects. You can add some grain to it. You can also add a vignette to it. And if you want it to, you want it to make it look a little bit older and grainier, you can do that as well. So it makes it look a little bit more like film. Okay, and then you have calibration down here where you can adjust these different calibrations. Now you can also do things like cropping in here. You can do some basic healing stuff in here. but like you can take it in here and you can crop it. My favorite thing about this crop tool is right here is that straightening tool. So, you know, if you want to straighten it while you're working on it as a raw file, you can do it right here. You can also rotate and flip it. You do have a red eye setting in here. Again, just like I said with the out of focus, if you take a photo and it has red eye, sometimes you can fix it, sometimes you can't. If you can, sometimes it doesn't look real. So what red eye actually is light bouncing off the back of your eye and coming back, and it's shining, it's reflecting what's in your eye. So what you're getting is that red color. So if you go in there and make it black and use red eye correction on it, sometimes it'll overdo it. So you just got to kind of be careful with it and play with it. Okay. So you can do all these things. And what I want you to do for this tutorial is just kind of go through and play with it and make this photo look the way you want it to look. And you can go through any of these and kind of play with them. Make sure you kind of go through basic. That's where you're going to get a lot of your changes. But like I said, I'm going to go ahead and you can do a couple different things with this, which is really nice. So if you were doing a whole set of these, so let's say I took 10 pictures of him in front of this wall and I want him to have exactly the same profile settings, I can just come down here, hover over the one I already did and do copy edit settings. And then I can select the next one, or I could do select and hold shift and select all of them. And then just do paste edit settings and it'll paste those settings to everything you've already done. It comes in super handy whenever you're doing something that you're having to edit a large batch. Okay. Next, then down here is where you can save. So you're going to click on this down button and it's going to give you some different options. First one is destination. I usually save to the same location, but you can set up a new location if you wanted to save it to it. And this is where you're going to tell it where to save to. The document name, you can name it here or you can leave it as your document name. So I'm just going to leave mine as my document name. File extension, you want to always change this to JPEG or to PSD or PNG or whatever type of file you're using. If you leave it as the DNG, that's going to be your raw file. So it's going to leave it as that. So you want to change it over to JPEG for this. For JPEG, I always, since I'm working in RAW and I want to keep my files as big as possible, I hit 12. Make sure it's at maximum. And then none of this other stuff I really worry about. I just leave it with the preset. And then you can hit save. I'm going to hit cancel because I don't need to save this one right now. But you would hit save. Now, we can do a couple different things. We can hit done and it would send you out of the RAW editing and just put you back at the regular Photoshop homepage. Or if you wanted to continue working on that image that we just did, you can come here to open and click on open and it's going to automatically open it in Photoshop for you. Give it just a second. And now I'm in a regular Photoshop window that I can work in and do what I want to it. Now, what I was saying was at the beginning of this that even if you're not working in raw files, you can edit as if you're in a raw file. So I'm going to actually open up my original. Actually, let's do it this way. I'll do it the easy way. Open with Photoshop. Okay, so this is the actual photo that I had edited and gave it to my son. So what we're going to do now, you can see up here it says JPEG on it. And so I'm going to go ahead and edit this as if it was just a regular JPEG file, but I want to work in the raw filter. So I can come up here to filter, camera raw filter, and click on it. And there, you can see I now have all the same things. Now, the only thing I don't like about the Camera Raw filter is if you do something to this and hit OK and go out of it, and if you come back into it again, it doesn't retain the changes that you've made in here. The photo will retain the changes, but it won't keep the numbers and stuff. So you can go like, oh, I want my exposure to be 15. Okay, here, I'll do 35 and hit OK. Now, if I come back up here to Camera Raw filter again, then I'm right back at 0. Okay, so you got to kind of pay attention to what you're changing it to and how much you want to change it so that you don't make any over corrections or anything like that. Or if you set it to 35 and then realize, you know what, I probably should have went a little bit more, you could go another 5 or whatever you want to do, okay? So this works just like that one that we had open earlier. So now you understand how to use this. For me, it works a lot better just because I can make those little bitty slider changes. I don't have to create a whole bunch of layers or anything to do that. I can just go in and do that on the picture itself. Okay, so as always, if you have any questions, please shoot me an email and we will get you an answer.